Good morning, everyone. Joe, I certainly want to thank you on behalf of the Academy for Park and Recreation Administration for taking time out during the busy conference today to kind of talk about your career, some of your thoughts, some of your aspirations, also some things that you think the future holds for our profession. You certainly have enjoyed a very distinguished career, particularly in New York and California. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your early days as a young person? Your military service, your college days, your high school days?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I was asthmatic when I was in elementary and high school. Third grade, they have you write what you like to be when you grow up. And I wrote, I wanted to be the coach of Notre Dame. Take Knute Rockne. At that time, Knute Rockne was living.
Very ambitious.
So, very ambitious. However, I was pretty small for football. And I went out for football, I weighed 116 pounds. And my manager, who I knew personally, said, Coach, he can't play football. He only weighs 116 pounds. The coach turned around and said, give him a uniform. He said, the All-American from Yale weighed 112 pounds, Bobby Booth. He says, he can play football if he has a desire. So I got into sports, and I was captain my senior year and president of the class, and then I had a scholarship at Bucknell, which I didn't want to take engineering, so I went to college and played sports, ran in the mile relay the first year I was there, all seniors and so on. We still hold a record for the mile relay. But I got into sports. Then I went in the Navy in 1943, and I was in San Diego, then shipped to California to Maui, and that was the underwater demolition. And I was an instructor, which we call the frogman. And it was during getting ready for the Japanese invasion. We came back to Oceanside, California, to get ready, to get 4 teams ready for that, and I was doing the training. When August 13th, they dropped the atomic bomb. So there's no longer any use for our underwater demolition team. So later I got transferred to the University of Southern California. And that was the first time that I had seen George Jelty, who had been director of recreation in Westchester, was now the superintendent in Los Angeles. So I took one course from him, and then I went in back to Waverly, back to college, and finished up. When I came out, there were a few opportunities in coaching, one in Rochester, one in my hometown, and so forth, and then recreation. I had no thought of ever going into recreation, but it was in Hudson Falls, my first community. But the school superintendent offered me $3,500. Teaching was $1,800, so I took the recreation job. And then I got him to agree that it would be helpful if I took some courses, so I went to NYU. And I had Dr. Nash and a few others who were inspirational to me. And I studied, went out and looked at programs. So I never had any recreation courses at all. And I don't know if you need them, excuse me, if you have the right attitude and you learn on the job. I think that you don't need a master's degree to be a successful recreation leader. You need the right ingredients, the right interests, and the right methods to accomplish your objectives.
This is a question that always intrigues me, is why did you pick recreation? Back when you did this, recreation really wasn't a thriving field at the time. And I look at that myself in many cases.
Exactly. Well, it happened like this. I took courses at USC, but not in recreation, child psychology, anatomy, and so forth. Transferred to college. So when I went back, I only had 3 months to finish up. And when in about December, I was getting leads on jobs, one in my hometown coaching, and one in Rochester teaching physical education. And I went up to Hudson Falls, was interviewed by school superintendent and the board, and he took me to lunch at his house. I said, well, I think I had the job. But anyhow, it paid are 3,200 to 35. The coaching jobs and teaching were 1,800 at Rochester. So I didn't know which, I knew I had background in physical education, so I talked to Al Sake, S-A-A-K-E, later became director of Hawaii University. He said, you don't know what you like to choose? I said, no. He says, go over on the board and write 3,500. Now write 1,800 and subtract. I said, 2,100. He said, if you're so smart, take that job in Hudson Falls. So that's how I got into recreation.
So you really didn't have a motivation.
I didn't have any.
It was just
Never
the
even
salary,
thought of it.
the difference in the salary.
Well, he had been a graduate work at NYU. We talked about that. And he told me what he thought, and he'd been in charge of camping and pro. Matter of fact, I played football against his teams and basketball against his team when I was in high school. So I knew him slightly. He was my inspiration at that time. I had no other reason to go into recreation. His idea was, this is a growing field, as you said. And New York State had just started the State Youth Commission. And there were over, I think, over 800 programs going in New York State under Governor Dewey to prevent delinquency. And that was a great beginning in New York State of recreation and parks. So all the communities that have programs today.
I suspect you're very glad that you made that decision, since you spent your entire career in parks recreation.
Well, it's interesting. I coached a little bit at USC, and I took all their plays, and UCLA and so forth. So when I was going to go into football, I thought that'd be an advantage. 2 years later, I was offered a coaching job in Glens Falls, which is your hometown. And they were very, very serious about their football team. And I didn't apply. By that time, I had gone to the conference in New York, NRA, which is the same as we have here now, 1947. And I saw the scope of recreation. I met with Dr. Nash, and I had friends that we went around and looked at programs. So the long story short, I decided this is what I want to do for my career. It was by luck, and I suppose I did not. Coaching to me was very important, and physical education was very important, health education. But I saw the scope, and I see it today, where recreation influenced the entire city, entire state, and federal.
You know, in looking at your background and your career, one of the things that impressed me was that you extend yourself beyond the job. And what you did, you became very involved in the New York State Park and Recreation Society, National Recreation Park Association. You impacted those associations.
Well,
talk a little bit about that involvement and the impact that you had.
Well, it started when I was interviewed by Dana King, school superintendent, who's chairman of the Recreation Board in Hudson Falls. And I said, frankly, sir, I'd like to go to NYU, not this year, next year, January, 4-week program. And I thought, he's not going to allow that. He said, I admire that. You want to continue your education. While there, I learned a lot. And another friend of mine, we went around the Madison Square Boys Club and youth centers and so on. As I looked at it, I thought I had to develop a better background. So I started to go to New York State. Well, the first conference I was in New York City in 1947. And we, headed up by Robert Moses, did a caravan through Westchester, the Bronx River Parkway, first parkway built in America, at our county center, at Playland, first Playland, the first amusement park in 1906. These are the facilities that I became commissioner. I was earning $3,000 and $11,000 budget. But I saw the scope of it, and every year I went to a conference, I always asked, could I go see, whether it be Dallas or Houston or here. I was here in '89. I went around to all the playgrounds. I saw the mayor last night on TV with your recreation director talking about a playground, which is a wonderful thing that they're involved in. And I had the Board of Education. My interest was, I wanted to see what they're doing, what's new. And each city I went to, I learn. I also talk to people in the last week who don't go to any conferences, and that to me bothers me. I think you've got to open up. Today's programs are new and different, and tomorrow's programs will be different. You got to keep up with the times.
Most of your years were spent at Rochester, New York, Westchester County, New York, and then in San Francisco. You know, there has to be a lot of experiences that you had in those three major metropolitan areas that have made you think back about what you did, how you did it. I know in a number of cases you got involved with the political agendas.
Sure did.
And you might want to talk a little bit about that.
Well, at my first community, Hudson Falls in Geneva, and we started with no program and built a whole program. We had over 2,000 volunteers in a community of 18,000, and we had all the civic groups helping us. When I was in Freeport, then I took a civil service exam for Rochester. They were not satisfied the way the department was being run, and 4 of us passed it. One you know, Sid Lutzen, who became the assistant NRA, and Al Jensen, and I was selected. I didn't know much about politics. I hadn't run up against it at all. When I got there and was interviewed, they said, I was riding in on the bus the first morning, and here's the headline, total length of paper, his job won't be easy. They didn't know because every leader was appointed through the ward. Republican, there are 24 wards. As the 23rd ward person left, that was the first priority. Was not my priorities. Then I went around and talked to PTAs and civic groups, playgrounds. They don't do anything. So I had to make a decision. And my family was back in, I had 2 little kids with my wife back in Freeport, and I had a rooming house. I decided to send out an application. They'd never seen one before. You just got a slip, you're hired. So what does it take? I thought, I'm not going to stand for this. So I wrote to every school, 9 high schools, 46 elementary schools. I got over 200 applicants. Then I numbered them, 0, 1, 2, skills, and so on, 6, 7. Then I noticed I wasn't getting them. I was getting the bottom coming through to be hired. So I complained to the personnel office, and they gave me a few people. That was enough to get started. The newspapers were very helpful. The TV, we had them send in a weekly event. We were covered a great deal by the media. So we grew, and then we came to full-time people. They were all political. Now you got to motivate them. So I did workshops and training, got them involved in state conference. I hired a bus and took them to Elmira, 30-some people, never been to a conference before. And that's one thing I want you to do. You got more ideas than most communities. I want you to speak up. When they talk about playgrounds, you got ideas. I want to hear you speaking up. They did. Now that's the political end of it. Then we begin to get professional people. Summer people, good. Year-round people. I went to Cortland and interviewed 10 candidates and hired 9 of them because we were able to do that through civil service. So you see, then we interfused the political people and the professional people. I could show no partiality. I always wanted to have someone come into my home. I didn't dare to do that. It was political. When I got the job in San Francisco, I'd say this, it's one of the greatest cities I ever worked in. There was no political interference. In Rochester, they would call me up and tell me, I want so-and-so hired, so on. And then when the Democrats took over, we had 54 people full-time that were not under civil service. Fire all of them. Now, I don't have a board, no commission. I recommend any recreation director having a board. When I asked the city manager, who was new, Porter Homer, I'd like to get advisory committees. Those advisory committees will get me in trouble. So you go it alone. I get called in, you will fire all those recreation people. Will I get better leadership in return? Some of them aren't doing too good. Well, I'll fire all of them. Then they had Mr. Posner, head of the Democratic Party, Said, Joe, just send over 2 people each day. Well, I was glad to get out. I'm in the city, man. There's nobody supporting my view. And you have to stand up, be counted many times in a political situation. When you go in another community, it's different. From there, we built, and I was just back to a reunion of my staff, both political and professional, last October 23rd in Rochester. They showed the Aqua Festival. They showed how we got all the playgrounds involved in it. Never did they thought, I said, I hadn't spoken. Why we have the Aqua Festival? Because the mayor wanted to clean up the Genesee River. Oh, I don't have that maintenance staff. So I went to the library and I found 1903 they had an Aqua Festival. 1913, 1923, then it ended. I copied that. The mayor got all the departments together. And when I saw that film, I said, that's how we made the breakthrough. We got everybody involved, got them to be part of it. In San Francisco, had no such problem. There were professional staff, but we had other problems, which were numerous. And
what about the political situation in San Francisco?
I can say this honestly. When I went there, I've told this a couple of times, I felt I came from purgatory or hell into heaven because they never once interfered with my leadership.
How did you get along with Mayor Alioto?
Never had a better person to work with in my life. Mayor Alioto is an interesting story. He was not in politics. When he was the mayor coming up, the future mayor, McAteer, Gene McAteer, dropped dead playing handball just a couple of weeks before election. Some of my board members met and they persuaded Joe Alioto to run for mayor. Of course, he won. 6 months later, he spoke at the National Democratic Conference, one of the greatest speeches. Little story. I got to him several times. One time, we were going down to Anaheim to the state conference, and he offered to speak. I rode down the plane. He said to me, tell me about recreation parks. I told him, what are your main ideas and thoughts and objectives? I told him 4 or 5 things. He got up and spoke. He was magnificent. He supported everything we did. I asked for a study which was called the Mainers, that I saw the maintenance. We had 2,000 full-time people in San Francisco, and they're good people, but they're not working smartly. So I talked to Bill Fredrickson in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. I came in with a Maynard study. My board said, well, okay. The mayor called me and he said, Joe, sounds good. They saved $1.5 million. We could use that. But we don't have the 93,000 you're asking. I said, Mayor, do you mind if I raise the money myself? He said, be my guest. Now here is something that happens quite often. When you get a setback, that's a challenge. That's an opportunity you'll never have again. So my chairman of the board got the Chamber of Commerce. We met with the Zellerback, the Blight Zellerback Committee, all the corporate people. First met with them, they said, well, I told them what I thought was wrong. They're watering the golf course in daytime. They're doing some terrible things that should be done properly. If you know that, why don't you do it? I said, I have 13 unions, gentlemen, 13 unions. And I can't achieve all that without facts. Leave the room. When I come back, and I had my assistant, Tom Malloy, with me. He said, I think you blew it. I said, why? He said, you asked him for too much. Come on back in. Oh, you're going to have that, but we'll have our people meet with you a couple times a month. Excuse me, I need your best person, not the person that's retiring, I need your best person full-time for 6 months. Leave the room. He said, I knew you blew it then. I came back in, they said, you have that. That is the Blight Zellerback study. We did 233 recommendations that changed the whole operation. I was there 3 years ago. I talked to Elizabeth Goldstein. Do you use that? She reached back on the desk and says, this is my Bible. This involved the entire corporate community, just like I saw last night on television here with the mayor, the school superintendent, and a sponsor. These are areas that if you don't reach for them, you can't accomplish that. A lot of departments work inside themselves and think, well, we've got enough problems. You've got to open up. You can get, in Westchester County, when I went there, they had 6 concerts. The first one, U.S. Naval Band. Oh, that's going to be great. I went down to Kinsko Plaza. I had to furnish the lunches. 47 lunches, I recall, or 48. I counted the attendance. We had 47 people. What's wrong? No PR. Every community you go into, whether it's political or not, you're going to have challenges and problems you got to solve. So, the way I look at it, why I would come to these conferences, because I get new ideas. And when I did something in Rochester, a mobile swimming pool, it wasn't my idea. I got it at a conference from the YMCA, had one. So I copied it and got the Freehoff to do a swimming pool that we could bring in the inner city. A swimming pool on wheels that we taught youngsters the basic strokes. Then we moved them into our high school swimming pools. So there were all kinds of ways of solving these problems, but I think you have to take some initiative.
You know, one of the questions that really would help us getting your thoughts on would be that in the last decade particularly, and the decade before that, we've had tremendous political changes, cultural changes, social changes, funding for parks and recreation. How do you think that those changes has significantly challenged park and recreation people? And what can we do about them?
I think a lot of changes have taken place. See, older department years ago operated within themselves. They didn't involve the community. And I think a lot of the leaders today are doing that. For example, last night on TV with a playground safety program. When I was in San Francisco, the playgrounds were terrible, the facilities were terrible, and the community centers needed rehabbing. So our board, fortunately had a wonderful board there, went for a bond issue, $10 million. We thought we had a pretty good plan. Willie McCovey, I went on TV with him and halftime in San Francisco, and Willie Mays and many others we had, but we failed. Incidentally, failure is the greatest challenge you could have. We got 66 1/3 votes in that city for a $10 million bond issue. The more I thought about it, we're not too well involved in the community. So I formed the Friends of Recreation Park. Those Friends, which is a 501(c)(3) tax exempt, I think it's the first one or the second one in the country. I've formed 8 or 9 of those since then. That's how you get that citizenship involved. They did wonders. And I went back there 3 years ago, as I mentioned. They passed a $200 million bond issue. They're revamping all of their facilities in Golden Gate Park and so on. So I asked why. The Friends went door to door. They got 70%. I failed. But when you fail, you try to figure out why. Well, what happened? What can we do? So to me, that's a challenge, and I've had some success with Friends in Westchester, Friends in Muscoot, so on. In other words, I see that a lot of leaders today are getting the community involved. Didn't used to happen that way. They worked within the walls of their own department.
What are some of these significant happenings, say, in the last decade?
I think one of the biggest ones is environmental conservation. Recreation in parks, and mostly playgrounds, community centers, and maybe museums and zoos and so forth, has now grown into, as it did in Westchester, conservation. In historical preservation, those are 2 great areas that are added onto this field, and they're significant. I think perhaps we're getting better leadership through the college training. I wasn't totally serious about, you didn't have to go take recreation courses.
I'm glad about that.
Yeah, it helps a lot.
I wouldn't have a job.
Well, no, I think the reason I say that, you got to use ingenuity. You can take all those courses if you can't figure out how to solve problems. And you wrote a book one time, How to Solve Problems. I thought that was important. How do you solve the problem? Oh, well, you don't do it alone. You get your staff, you get the community. So those things are happening now they didn't used to. There are serious problems. We had problems when I first came into recreation called delinquency. Well, we still have problems. But you see, those programs were trying to help solve and keep youngsters involved. Today we have problems with drugs. We have serious problems. We have problems of gangs. We didn't have those problems years ago. Those are new problems, and they face every community, every major city in the United States. How do you work with gangs? How do you get the community involved? How do you get that leadership? In Rochester, one of the things happened, I shouldn't say it this way, that we made a change because we had the second riot in 1967. First one's in Newark. We couldn't open our swimming pools and our recreation centers and so forth, but we were able to get involvement of our staff and so forth. And one of the things that we did was to call upon our junior college. I started the first community recreation program, I think, in the country at Monroe Community College, 2-year program. I felt you don't need 4 years to be a recreation director of this center. 2 years, and we started a program. We hired those people. See, when you have a riot, they'll give you all kinds of federal aid. So we took advantage of it. We brought up all kinds of programs for our mini parks, leadership, for our swimming pools, so on and so forth. Those are things that you have to use what you have in that community. Every community is different. When you go from one community to the next, you don't take any of your achievements with you. You start all over. And you start over, finding out what the community's been doing. Why did they hire you to come to Podunk or to Decatur, Illinois, or wherever, or San Francisco? In San Francisco, they had a problem, leadership problem at the top. They did not want somebody from the department, so they interviewed 37 candidates. And I went to New York City to be interviewed. Just before I came in for the interviewer from the board, Joe Curtis, who you know, was interviewed. He said, the person you want to hire is coming in next. Joe Caverly. I didn't know that. He said, funny thing happened to me. And Mr. Cahill was my board member later, and I love him dearly. Joe Curtis recommended you for the job. You've done all these things in community centers and in the deprived neighborhood and so on and so forth, with swimming pools and portable pools. I said, I never had that happen before. In San Francisco, they had a leadership problem. They were not reaching the community. It was a great operation. Years ago, it was great. So I had to get them involved. And through that corporate group, we did. And then when I got through, not my idea, the leading company, a worldwide company, did training. They said, now you've done this, we're going to put on a training institute for you. I said, great. 22 weeks. We had the whole staff come together to learn how to work together. We took 2 hours out. It's interesting, downtown San Francisco. Here are all of our trucks coming in and parking all over the place, and they want to know what's happening. We're being trained for further. They have done a remarkable job, and it's gone on. And when you go back to a community, one of the sad things is you find out they're back in the political problem or they haven't progressed. But some communities like San Francisco and some others in Rochester have progressed nicely.
Let's assume that there are 25 students sitting out with us in this room. And behind those 25 students, there's 2 professors who teach parks and recreation in the curriculum. What would you tell them are the skills and characteristics that they need to develop in order to be successful in our profession, say, in the future?
Let me see if I understand your question. The two professors?
Professors are the ones who are going to deliver the training
Oh,
and
those are
education.
teachers.
They're teachers.
Yes.
And then there's the students who are seniors, let's say. And next year they're going to be out on the firing line.
They're already in the
Yeah,
recreation.
they're already in the recreation
Okay,
curriculum.
that's different. I did the curriculum for Cortland when they first started, one of the helpers. And one of the things I recommended was political science. Of course, they didn't do that. In the communities, you should have some knowledge of how politics work. Skills. They should, if they're in their senior year, they've already developed their skills. They start when you're 8. Activities. Yeah, they should have a deep interest in what goes on in the community, the history of the community. If they're teaching the classes, get them involved. The field work is very important in this field, to go out and as someone said, stamp the grapes in the vineyard. Get your feet, get yourself involved. I think that's being done by a lot of the universities, and I've had some field workers who do a great job. Their skills are pretty well developed by the time they're seniors. If they were, you asked me about if they were in high school going in the field, you look for enthusiasm, you look for honesty, you look for, let's say, originality, come up, solve problems. Because what it is in this field is solving problems. One day after another, you're solving problems. So you need intestinal fortitude. There are times when this is not an easy job. Whether you're a community center director, or you're running a zoo, or you're running a swimming pool, or you're running a detached worker, working with gangs, not easy. All the skills that you have, you can use. But you need to broaden those skills. You don't need to stop when you graduate. That's why I think the conference like now, the NRPA conference here, is important. And as I came in last night, I see all these badges, people walking around the street. How many people are at this conference, would you say?
I have no idea. It changes so much every year. I have no idea.
But they're come from all over the United States.
Yes.
And when they're here, they are exchanging. As I saw last night, they're sitting around talking to each other. This is an interesting field. You can't stop learning. You got to keep moving. And you got to keep, let's say, developing your own skills as an administrator. You have to do that. Otherwise, you become stagnant.
Joe, all of us, when we go through our career, we have people who influence us. We have mentors, and we have mentors at different stages of our career. Who are the mentors or the people who've influenced you most in the terms of your career?
Well, early on, I think it would be my football coach that gave me the uniform. I'm refereeing a basketball game at Ithaca in Cortland, and here's the same coach. I hadn't seen him since way back in school. Coaches have a great influence. In college, some of the instructors, I think Dr. J.B. Nash, when I went to NYU, was one of the greatest inspirational leaders. And I had him come to Rochester to speak to our staff. I wasn't going to let that opportunity. I had him in my house. Dr. Nash wrote many books, as you know, Philosophy of Recreation and Spectacularitis and The Objectives of Physical Education. He was an outstanding administrator. When I was at NYU, he invited me and Bill Strona to sit in on what you had as a head of the departments of maybe 12 or 14 universities. So he was an excellent influence. Secondly, I think my own wife, Mary, she went in from teaching into recreation, and then I was hired in Geneva, and we worked together 2 years. And then, well, I waited at our table in college. I always say I turned the tables, and then I went, we were married and then went to various communities. I don't think I could have done some of those things. I don't think I could have gone through all the political problems in Rochester without a person like her. Other people that have influenced me a great deal, I think Sid Lutzen, who was very active in the state, and Sal Precioso, one. People I worked with in the field, and people that worked with me in the field. I think they're a great inspiration. I think that the college directors of Recreation and Park play a very important role in the future leadership of our country. I think they're doing a great job.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the future. How do you see the impact of parks and recreation, leisure in the communities and beyond the communities? Where do you see that in the future? For example, are we going to have what we know today is the Park and Recreation Department that takes care of the parks and playgrounds? Will they begin to go beyond that?
Well, I think they're well beyond that now. In Westchester, we had parks and recreation, conservation, historical preservation, and we're involved in all those things. Yeah, some of them will have to change. They're going to have an even greater involvement in the community. They got to let the people come in and, sit down and talk to the people. What do they want? And I think that is happening, but I think it will have to happen to even a greater extent. Everything is relative. Like in San Francisco, we had political groups, sociological groups, like Sal Alinsky's group, to get to move on the let's say the public leaders, to get them to do what they want. Well, I had them march on my home, and simply was All People's Coalition. They wanted more mini parks. Well, so did I. There was no difference. So I used to meet with them. They used to tape it. And then of course one day I guess they wanted publicity, so they came to my house and so on. And I didn't get involved in it. The point was, I think you're going to have more of that kind of community interest, and maybe politically, where they're demanding things, and sometimes it's for the good and sometimes it isn't. So I think the new leadership has got to deal with all facets in the community. The communities themselves are changing rapidly. Open space is one of the key things. I've always fought for buying land for acquisition, and fortunately we've been able to do that. I think there's too limited amount of open space in cities of the United States now.
You've been in this business for over 50 years. Is there any one or two experiences that stand out most?
A lot
That's
of
a
them.
tough question, Joe.
No, I was just thinking which ones. For example, in San Francisco, we had to deal with the Vietnam War. We had all kinds of protesters, and they would like to use the parks, to a point where we had, in one march, 230,000 people. Our department and the police department handled that particularly well. Society changes. That's not happening now, but you have unrest right now in the community over the present situation. You're dealing with those things the best you can, and you're trying to get that community involved as much as you can. So to me, those are things, there's where society is changing. We didn't have that years ago. Playgrounds, recreation, it's gotten broader. The public needs and is demanding a broader services today, and will be more so in the future, I believe.
The last question, how would you like to be remembered as a professional park and recreation director in a community by your peers?
Well, I guess I would say the kind of things that I've stood up for, the kind of vision, so forth, you might have, and also, I guess to my family, that we did the best job, and all my youngsters have been involved in community work and so forth. I feel pretty proud of what they have done and what my wife did as the director of Creative Leisure. More or less, it's hard to say that because my wife passed away 2 years ago, and I keep thinking about, I'm reading all the things she did that I didn't know about. How to Deal with Death was one of them. I never knew she wrote that. How I'd like to be remembered, I don't know. That what a great opportunity I had. What a wonderful thing happened to me. And as these decisions went, if I hadn't moved to Rochester, these things wouldn't happen. If I hadn't gone to San Francisco, they wouldn't have happened. It's a full life. It's a challenging one. It's a happy. We're on the happy end of services, more so than any other occupation you can think of. You can talk to all kinds of people. We see things happening. We can change a whole community, and I think that's how I'd like to be remembered. He tried to change and was somewhat successful.
Well, I would have to say that as one of your peers, that's the way I think you will be remembered.
Thank you.
On behalf of the Academy for Park and Recreation Administration, we'd like to thank you so much for the work you've done and during the last 50 years, the impact that you have had on our communities and on the lives of so many people. I would also like to say that the Legend series is a very important series, but because this gives young people an opportunity to understand the philosophies and the concepts that we have as park and recreation people. And this is a record and a recording of those so that future generations can see how their roots were established. Again, many thanks so much for coming in and
Well,
talking.
thank you for interviewing me. Appreciate it.